Welcome to this fifth week of our summer video series on the Ten Commandments and how it's really God's vision for how we experience the most freedom in life and in our relationships and in our community. We're going to focus on the fourth commandment, and this is a shift because the first three commandments are about our relationship with God and how we love God. And then the final seven commandments are about how we love our neighbor and how we experience freedom in that. And so today we're going to focus on honor your father and your mother. Pastor Bree and I were both parents. And so this is maybe our favorite commandment. We're going to impress this, upon our children the most. Would you read the commandment number 4 in the Old Testament?
Yeah, and I have to say, I think this is the one that I have to work the hardest to understand why it's so important. What does this really have to do with our life of faith and our life in community? So this one I think was the hardest for me to study so far.
But we're learning right along with you.
Yeah. So the commandment reads, honor your father and your mother, as the Lord your God commanded you, so that your days may be long and that it may go well with you in the land that the Lord your God is giving you. So perhaps a good way to start this conversation is to note that in Deuteronomy, and I just read the version from Deuteronomy, one of the repeat ideas or themes in that book is that it is the responsibility of each generation to pass on the commandments that God has given. And that's what's happening. That's the context for Deuteronomy. Moses is getting them ready to go into the promised land finally. And so he's reminding them how important it is that they carry these commandments with them, which is why it talks about, that your days may be long, that it will go well with you in this land, that you will continue to observe and follow God's ways. So Deuteronomy really lifts up that idea from generation to generation, and that it's the responsibility of parents and grandparents and faith communities to pass on and to teach the commandments to the next generation. So really this commandment isn't only about kids honoring their parents, but it also incorporates the responsibility of parents and other authority figures in children's lives to teach and to pass on. So there's responsibility going both ways.
Yeah.
It's not a one-sided.
And I think Martin Luther tried to figure out what is the importance of this commandment, and the insight Martin Luther had was in his small catechism and his explanation in the large catechism, because this is the first of those final 7 commandments. And I think the insight is that, when we're very young, we look up to our parents almost in a godlike manner. So it's almost like when we're children, how we honor our parents is really a way of practicing to honor God. It's really kind of it's like we're laying a foundation for how we're in relationship, with everyone that we're going to be in relationship for the rest of our life, and even how our relationship with God will be like. And, just because as children, that relationship with our parent is so primary. And so I think that's a really amazing insight.
It is.
That God has, and that the 10 Commandments were given thousands of years ago. And it's interesting to me, as someone who does follow modern psychology, and their, systems theory and family of origin. Anybody who's been, through counseling, you will recognize that, a big, very important questions that are asked. Tell me about your relationship with your mother. Tell me about your relationship with your father. And it might be issues of depression, or it might be issues of insecurity. But modern psychologists, why are they asking me all these questions about my mom and my dad? Yeah. But I think it's because so much of our identity, so much of our psyche is just shaped on a psychological basis on those early formational years. And so I think it's really amazing how, ancient wisdom and modern wisdom are really kind of in line about how important this is, because it really is honoring your father and your mother are really kind of setting a stage and setting a strong foundation that the rest of the relationships of our life are going to be built upon.
Yeah, it really is. The relationship with parents, between parents and children, is the first relationship of trust that we have. And so that's reflective too, it becomes the foundation. Modern child psychologists that talk about faith talk about how children perceive their parents is how they will first perceive God. And so it almost creates the basis of a trusting relationship with God. And then it also creates a way to practice and understand other relationships in our lives. So, we start in this nuclear family, but then that gives us the basis for how we'll treat other relationships later on down the road.
Yeah. So do you want to kind of talk about, rock ministry and that was a big shift here in our congregation of Mountain View, kind of moving away from a conventional Sunday school or conventional confirmation, but kind of what the vision of rock ministry was and how it kind of ties into the fourth commandment here.
Yeah, well, and I think it lifts up the importance of working with both parents and children, and this idea that the fourth commandment really gives us a foundation for what we're trying to do in rock ministry, that we're trying to support those relationships in families. It's really a ministry of supporting our families, both parents and children. So yeah, that it gives us our instruction from God about how do we equip families to live into this commandment in ways that are healthy and nurturing.
Yeah. I mean, again, Martin Luther, he has this idea of the priesthood of all believers, and it's not just, priests and monks, that when they're ordained, have this holy and sacred ministry. I mean, Martin Luther really expanded it and strongly emphasized that parents, mothers and fathers, that being a parent is a holy calling, and that parents, and that the vision for parents is not that they're just, teaching their kid to operate in the world, but that parents really are ordained to teach the faith, to teach the commandments, to provide an environment in their home and in their family in which they're, creating an atmosphere and an ecosystem for children to grow up in faith. And so this is really what we want to equip and empower parents to be able to do, to give them the tools. Because, kids are going to spend a lot more time at home than they're going to spend in a church building. And so we want to maximize our time here by giving our parents the tools and ideas and encouragement so that when they go back home with their kids, they can kind of carry this forth in their home in a place where they're going to be spending a lot more time together in faith-shaping ways.
And most of the parents I talk to here at Mountain View will say that part of the reason they are here is because they want the support of the community in helping to raise their kids, that they need that support, that there's a recognition that they can't do this alone. And so, that's where too, we really take that baptismal promise we make as a congregation to support the children we baptize in learning the faith. Got to take that very seriously, because families need that. They need that support. I need that support. So we talked about in the commandment number 3 about Sabbath keeping, that challenging us to not just hear this as kind of applying to an individual, but how does a whole community practice Sabbath keeping? And I think even with the fourth commandment, I think it's helpful to kind of bring in the kind of the community element. How do we as a community, not just an individual parent, kind of thinking, how do I help my kid, to honor father and your mother, but how do we as a whole community help and equip parents to parent in a way that it's going to be worthy of the honor of their children, but as a community to help children in carrying forth this commandment as well. So I think I like the way Mountain View is, we kind of have taken this, the community is trying to live this out, and it's not just, for individual families to figure out, but we're figuring it out together as a community. So, Pastor Eric, families can be really complex, and sometimes it's not always easy to honor, and sometimes it's not always easy to honor.
I thought my family was the only complex family.
So what does this look like to actually honor our parents, and especially in like times of tension or something? How do we honor our parents?
I mean, being a family is not easy. Relationships with our parents, or for parents, relationships with our kids is complicated, from when they're very young to when they're teenagers to when they grow. That relationship is fraught with ups and downs and complexity. And so, I mean, I don't think we should beat ourselves up too much. I mean, if we don't have these healthy, wonderful relationships, between parents and children, I mean, I think we should be gentle with ourselves. I think we should be gracious with ourselves, and always understand I think this commandment is always inviting us back into how can we, make the next right step to a more honorable relationship with our parents. I mean, no matter, what hurt, what break in that relationship has happened in the past. I think, this commandment is not commanding that our relationships have to be perfect. It's just commanding that there's an honorableness.
A respect.
A respect in that relationship. And, even kids, I think it's healthy for kids. Honoring your mother and your father doesn't mean that you agree with and go with your parents all the time. I think it's probably good and healthy, especially in those teenage years, that kids, kind of push back and maybe even have a disagreement with their parent. Maybe a parent is like, you're going to be a doctor no matter what. And the kid's like, no, I'm not going to be a doctor. And when the kid pushes against that, it's not that there's a way to push against, maybe an expectation that your parents have, but in an honorable way, in a respectful way. And so it's not that there's supposed to be this lockstep agreement. It's not that our relationship are supposed to be perfect. There can be tension. There can be disagreement. There can be different visions, for how life unfolds. But there is still a way that we can do that honorably.
I was listening to Vietnamese, a second generation Vietnamese American, speak about the incredible differences between his parents' generation and first generation people coming to America as immigrants, and then his generation, and the very different goals and expectations they have for life. And he talked about how difficult it was to kind of reconcile his parents' hopes for him and versus his hopes for him. But I think that does really call, and he kind of talked about the process of learning to honor and acknowledge. I think part of honoring is just naming and holding what was important to his parents, and then also being able to name for himself what was important for him, and to then hold both of those things together, even if they aren't the same, but at least naming and acknowledging different hopes or dreams for parents and children.
Yeah. And I think, from a child's perspective, just having a sense of gratitude, for your parents. I mean, maybe your mom or your dad or your stepmom or your stepdad, maybe they've made some mistakes, but they've also probably made some sacrifices, on behalf of their children. And, maybe their way of expressing love is different than the way that you need love to be expressed to you. But, I think maybe gratitude is a good place to start. To just maybe planting some of those seeds of, having a measure of respect, having a measure of honor for and I think that might not fix a broken relationship, but I think that can maybe plant some seeds of just, having it more of a sense of peace. Because when we hold grudges, or, when we kind of have this constant adversarial relationship, in a very complicated relationship with our parents or with our children, that's something we can carry with us. And I think, God wants to, lighten our load. God wants to set us free from all of those things. And I think, maybe just making that one next step of having a sense of gratitude, having a sense of respect and honor for your parents, might give us a little healing or a little peace. Mm-hmm. And, I think this really applies in our society today. It's becoming more infrequent that we're able to disagree with one another or argue with one another in honorable ways. That might be in the workplace. It might be in our families. It might be in politics. It might be in the church. And I think this commandment really applies in all of those instances. I think God is trying to give us a vision that there is a way that we can disagree with one another, but in very honorable ways. Mm-hmm. And if parents and children can figure that out, if we can practice that in that really primary relationship, if we can practice disagreeing with one another in honorable ways, I think that's going to have fruitful benefit just in our communities and even in our nation right now.
Yeah. I also know a lot of parents whose children are no longer in the church, despite having practiced raising them in the church, and for whom hearing this commandment might be a bit challenging. And yet, again, I think there's a way in which if we practice being in relationship with one another, even if we don't agree on everything, say faith, for example, but to still remain connected is a way of honoring the heart and the spirit of this commandment, even for families whose whole family isn't necessarily participating in the faith.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. I think that is, probably, heavy on the hearts of a lot of folks, especially older parents. And again, to kind of bring in the community aspect to this, I think, that it's okay to be faith adjacent. It's not that every individual, we look at an individual like, are you in the church or are you out the church? That's a very individualized approach. But what if we had kind of a sense of more of a community, and within the community, there's people that are, really kind of congregated, in the center, but then there's all these kind of community adjacent people, and they're still kind of a part of the community.
Spill over from the community.
And maybe it's okay if people are faith adjacent. Yeah. Maybe your child that doesn't want to go to church or worship anymore, maybe it's okay that they're faith adjacent through you. And our neighbors, other people that might use this campus. There's lots of ways to be faith adjacent. Jesus hung out with a lot of people who were faith adjacent.
He did.
That was really kind of a main thing. And so, how do we still have a way that we honor and respect one another, and not kind of have this black and white in or out. Maybe it's okay to be faith adjacent, even that's our own children. I don't know. I'm just spitballing here.
Well, we hope this has given you some good things to think on in terms of how you live into your relationships, whether with your children or your parents. And if you've liked this video, please do like it on social media or online. And you can take a look at the Mountain View YouTube page for other offerings. And we invite you back next week to hear about the next commandment in our series.